Australia is the most mineral-rich continent on Earth, and for 150 years that meant one thing. Companies showed up, built towns, pulled everything out of the ground, and left. They left the buildings, left the shafts, left the tailings, and in some cases left behind contamination so severe that the people whose country it actually was can no longer set foot on it. Some of these places have been turned into tourist attractions. Some have been reclaimed by the rainforest. And at least one has been erased from the official maps, not because the town is gone, but because the government does not want you stopping there. Stay for number 1. The lawsuit filed over it in February 2026 is worth $1.5 billion, and it is still in court right now. Number 12. Broad Arrow, Western Australia. 38 kilometres north of Kalgoorlie, in the eastern Goldfields, there is a single pub with walls covered floor to ceiling in signatures. Travellers, prospectors, and tourists have been leaving their names on those walls for decades, and almost none of them know that the building they are standing in is the last surviving commercial structure of a town that once held up to 15,000 people. Broad Arrow was established in 1893 after prospectors found gold in the red dirt of the Goldfields. The name came from the arrows they scratched into the ground to guide late arriving companions to camp. Within 4 years it had 8 hotels, 2 breweries, a stock exchange, a hospital, 3 churches, and a 107-metre railway platform built to handle the crush of passengers arriving on the Eastern Goldfields Railway. The Mines Department constructed a public water reservoir capable of holding 45 million litres, purely to supply steam locomotives. It was a functioning city in the middle of the desert, built entirely on the assumption that the gold would keep coming. It did not. The high-grade alluvial deposits were gone by 1901. The population fell from an estimated 15,000 to 542 in the space of a few years, and by 1911 only 280 people remained. By the 1920s, the gold rush was finished and the town was empty. The railway, the reservoir, the 8 hotels, all gone. The Broad Arrow Tavern survived because someone kept running it, and it is still running today, population 20, walls full of names. Number 11. Cassilis, Victoria. The gold at Cassilis, in the Swifts Creek region of East Gippsland, was always going to be difficult. The quartz reefs were rich enough to draw a rush in 1885, and by the 1890s the combined settlements of Cassilis and Tongia West had 600 residents, 2 schools, a mechanics institute, and a handful of stores. The problem was the ore itself, a complex sulfide-rich rock that resisted every standard extraction method available at the time. To solve it, the mine operators built cyanide treatment plants, which was the cutting-edge chemistry of the era. To power those plants without hauling coal through mountain roads, the Cassilis mine built what is believed to be Australia's first hydroelectric power station on the Cobungra River in 1908. They ran a 5-kilometre open race to convey the water and used the turbines to run their processing equipment. It was genuinely innovative engineering for a remote goldfield in 1908, but the seasonal water flows in the Cobungra River were unreliable. When the hydro scheme failed, there was no affordable alternative. The First World War took the remaining labour force. The mines closed in 1918, the town emptied, and in 1939 the Black Friday bushfires destroyed most of what was left standing. What you find at Cassilis today is a historical reserve preserving the stone foundations of the cyanide vats, the abandoned mine shafts, and some scattered boilers, the physical evidence of a technical problem that was almost solved, and a town that ran out of time before it could be. Number 10. Pillinger, Tasmania. To reach Pillinger today, you walk 3 hours along an abandoned railway line through West Coast Tasmanian rainforest. The track is gone, but the formation is still there, and at the end of it you find brick kilns, steam boilers, a rusting railway carriage, and the chimney of a mess hall rising out of the undergrowth. Pillinger was not abandoned because or ran out. It was abandoned because of a corporate merger and a decision made in a boardroom that nobody in the town had any say in. The North Mount Lyell Copper Company built the port of East Pillinger on Kelly Basin, an inlet of Macquarie Harbour, in the late 1890s. By 1902 it had 3 shipping wharves, an ore crushing plant, a sawmill, a brickworks, 25 businesses, and a population of 600 on the harbour. A railway connected it to the copper mines at Linda, further inland. It was, by West Coast Tasmanian standards, a substantial town. The problem was that a rival company, the Mount Lyell Mining and Railway Company, was shipping its copper through the port of Strahan on the other side of Macquarie Harbour. In 1903, the 2 companies merged. New management looked at running 2 competing port operations through the same remote harbour and made the obvious financial decision: consolidate at Strahan. The Kelly Basin Railway was declared redundant and dismantled. Pillinger declined rapidly. By 1920, it was almost entirely deserted, and by 1924, it was gone completely. The temperate rainforest has been reclaiming it ever since. The ruins now sit inside the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area, and the 3-hour walk in along the old rail formation is one of the stranger hikes on the island, following a ghost railway to a ghost port through one of the most intact temperate rainforests on Earth. Number 9. Arltunga, Northern Territory. Arltunga was Central Australia's first official town, and it predated Alice Springs as a regional hub. That fact alone tells you something about how remote it was. This was the edge of the known world in 1887, when David Lindsay found alluvial gold in a dry creek bed in the East McDonnell Ranges, 110 kilometres east of what is now Alice Springs. To get there required a 600-kilometre walk from the nearest railhead at Oodnadatta. There was no reliable water. Summer temperatures regularly exceeded 40 degrees. People came anyway, and by 1903 around 400 of them were there, working alluvial claims and quartz reef mines in conditions of chronic scarcity. The South Australian government built a police station, a jail, a government battery, and cyanide works to crush the ore. The Eastern Arrernte people worked as guides, miners, and trackers. Their country, their knowledge, their labour underpinning an operation focused entirely on extracting wealth and sending it elsewhere. The gold yields were lower than expected, rarely exceeding 1 ounce per tonne. During droughts, the wells ran dry and the horses were too weak to haul ore. A major breakdown at the battery in 1901 stopped all processing for months. When richer goldfields opened at Tennant Creek and the Granites in the late 1920s, the remaining miners left. The population dropped to 25 by 1933. A Catholic mission used the site from 1944 to 1953, and then Arltunga went quiet for good. The stone ruins of the jail, the police station, and the battery works have been preserved as the Arltunga Historical Reserve. The desert has not finished with them yet. Number 8. Joadja, New South Wales. Drop a like if you are finding this interesting, because number 7 involves a disaster that killed 75 men in a single morning and directly rewrote Queensland's safety laws. But first, a kerosene town in a sandstone valley that a legal dispute almost prevented from existing at all. Joadja sits in a steep gorge in the Southern Highlands, 2 hours southwest of Sydney. In the early 1850s, a landholder named Edward Carter noticed outcroppings of torbanite, kerosene shale, in the valley walls. He filed a mineral claim in October 1873. A man named William Cosgrove filed a claim on the same land the following day. The dispute went to the New South Wales Legislative Assembly and took 2.5 years to resolve. Carter won. The Australian Kerosene Oil and Mineral Company moved in, brought skilled miners over from Scotland, and built a fully self-contained industrial town in the valley, a sandstone schoolhouse, brick retorts for processing the shale, a post office, and 2 gravity-guided incline tramways to haul or up the cliff faces. The horses that originally drove the whim were replaced by steam locomotives in 1880. At peak operation, the town had over 300 residents producing kerosene, paraffin wax, and candles for the colonial market. The end came from outside the valley. Cheaper petroleum from America and Russia flooded the market in the early 1900s, and shale-derived kerosene could not compete on price. The plant closed in 1911. Because the valley remained in private hands, the ruins were never cleared or developed. The sandstone schoolhouse, the retorts, and the brick kilns are still there, in the same valley, slowly weathering. A heritage distillery now operates on the site. They make single malt whiskey among the ruins of a 19th century refinery, on land that the Gundungurra people have held for far longer than any of this. Number 7. Mount Mulligan, Queensland. At 9:25 on the morning of the 19th of September 1921, every man working underground at the Mount Mulligan colliery was killed simultaneously. The coal dust and methane explosion was heard 30 kilometres away. All 75 miners died. It remains the worst industrial disaster in Queensland's history. Mount Mulligan was never a gold town or a silver town. It was a coal town, 157 kilometres west of Cairns, built in 1910 to fuel the regional railways and copper smelters of far north Queensland. The sandstone cliffs of the Ngarrabulgan Massif, a sacred site of the Jungan people, rose above it on one side, and the Chillago Railway connected it to the outside world. It was a hard, functional place doing a specific industrial job, and by 1921 it had around 300 residents. The explosion killed enough of the male population that the town did not have a cemetery at the time. One was built immediately to bury the victims. The disaster led directly to Queensland's Coal Mining Act of 1925, which introduced mandatory safety inspections, strict ventilation requirements, and rules for coal dust management that became the foundation of the modern safety framework. The mine reopened in 1922 and ran until 1957, when the commissioning of the Tully Falls hydroelectric scheme eliminated the regional demand for coal. The railway closed in 1958. The town was abandoned. Today, there are no permanent residents. A single brick chimney stack stands among the industrial ruins, and the historic cemetery, built in grief in the days after the explosion, is still there on the edge of the cleared land, overlooking the sandstone cliffs. Number 6. Linda, Tasmania. Linda is not a town people associate with tragedy, because most people have never heard of it. It sits in the scarred valley west of Queenstown in Tasmania, and at its peak around 1900 it had 600 residents, 4 hotels, a church, a school, and a railway connecting it to the copper mines of the Mount Lyell Range. The Royal Hotel was built in concrete in 1901, specifically to resist fire, because fire was already a known hazard in a town built around deep, unstable mine shafts. That precaution did not prevent the disaster that ended Linda's viability. On the 12th of October 1912, fire broke out in the underground shafts of the North Mount Lyell mine and killed 42 workers. It remains one of the worst mining disasters in Tasmanian history. After the disaster, the corporate operators accelerated the transfer of operations to neighbouring Gormanston and Queenstown. The departure of the mining workforce made Linda unviable, and the town emptied within years. The Royal Hotel continued operating until 1952, then fell silent. It was sold in 2020 for private heritage restoration and recently hosted an art installation designed to honour the 42 men who died underground. The valley around it carries more than a century of acid mine drainage from the Mount Lyell operations, copper, zinc, aluminium, and iron leaching through the rock, running into waterways that are still recovering. The acid water does not know the mine is closed. Number 5. Walhalla, Victoria. There is a mountain cricket ground at Walhalla that was built by levelling the top of a hill. There are early electric streetlights that went in before most Australian cities had them. There is a cemetery with more than 1,100 people buried on a steep hillside above the town. And there are 20 permanent residents, which is more than most of the towns on this list but still a fraction of the 4,000 people who lived here in 1900, when Walhalla was the richest goldfield in Victoria. Gold was found in the creek gravels in late 1862 by a former convict named Edward Stringer, who died of tuberculosis shortly after registering his claim. In February 1863, 2 prospectors named Hinchcliffe and Myers discovered Cohen's Reef, a quartz vein that turned out to be the richest single gold-bearing reef in Victoria, producing over 55 tons of gold across its lifetime. The Long Tunnel Mining Company alone extracted more than 30 tons. The valley was so steep and so narrow that a railway line did not reach it until 1910, by which time the town was already dying. The mine needed steam-powered machinery to crush the ore, and the boilers needed wood. The surrounding hillsides were stripped bare for kilometres in every direction. Timber tramways were built to haul wood from increasingly distant ridges. When the cost of fuel rose to the point where mining was no longer profitable, the mine closed in 1914. The population fell from 4,000 to 235 by 1921, and continued dropping for the rest of the century. The Gunai-Kurnai people are the traditional custodians of the valley. The trees have grown back. Number 4. Silverton, New South Wales. In 1875, workers drilling a well in the far west of New South Wales hit a rich silver lode instead of water. The town of Silverton, originally called Umberumburka, was proclaimed in 1880, and by 1885 it had 3,000 residents, a school of 140 pupils, a hospital, a jail, a municipal chambers, and a tramway line connecting the mines to the South Australian Railway network for transport to the smelters at Port Pirie. The Daydream mine, which opened in 1882, employed child labourers as young as 8 in harsh underground conditions. The Umberumburka, Daydream, and Thackeringa mines were the economic engine of the entire region, and Silverton's residents believed they were building something that would last. Then, in 1883, the larger silver lead zinc or body at Broken Hill was discovered, just down the road. The line of lode at Broken Hill dwarfed everything Silverton sat on. Within years, residents were dismantling their iron and canvas homes and hauling them by rail, donkey, and camel team to Broken Hill to reassemble there. The mines at Silverton closed between 1892 and 1897. The municipal council was dissolved in 1907. The town that had been a city a generation earlier ended the century with 286 people. Today, Fewer than 50 people live in Silverton. The heritage site is managed by a local committee. Mad Max 2 was filmed in the surrounding desert in 1981, and the post-apocalyptic landscape the filmmakers needed was already there, a place that had been stripped of its reason to exist and left to bake in the heat. The Wittenoom people are the traditional custodians of this country. Number 3, Mary Kathleen, Queensland. Between Mount Isa and Cloncurry in northwestern Queensland, there is a free camping ground on a cattle station where visitors park their caravans on concrete slabs. If you look carefully, you can find a stone water fountain that once stood in the centre of a town square. At the edge of the property, an open-cut pit is filled with water of an extraordinary turquoise colour, a shade produced by the chemical leaching of heavy metals and radioactive elements from the pit walls. It looks beautiful. It will kill you. This is Mary Kathleen, Australia's model uranium town, and the people who built it took everything when they left except the slabs, the fountain, and the toxic pit. The uranium deposit was found in 1954 and named after prospector Norm McConaughey's late wife. The Australian Atomic Energy Commission backed the project, and by 1961 the town had 1,000 residents, a cinema, a hospital, a swimming pool with bright blue tiles, on-site orchards watered by a pipeline from Lake Corella, and the full infrastructure of a planned model community. The first phase of mining ran from 1958 to 1963, fulfilling contracts with the UK Atomic Energy Authority. Then the mine went on standby. It reopened in 1976 to supply Japanese, German, and American power utilities, and this phase attracted its own drama. Anti-uranium activists delayed the first secret rail shipment, maritime unions organised export blockades, and the mine's owners were forced to pay $34 million in compensation to Westinghouse Electric after leaked documents revealed their involvement in an international uranium price cartel. When the reserves were exhausted in 1982, Rio Tinto's closure was total. By the end of 1984, every house and every building had been auctioned and physically removed. They took the swimming pool. They took the cinema. They left behind 7.1 million tons of uranium tailings under a dry rock cap that was cheaper than an impermeable clay barrier, and that cap is now seeping acidic, radioactive water into local drainage at a measured rate of 0.5 litres per second. Long-term monitoring has found radioactive salts depositing along nearby watercourses and uptake of radionuclides into surrounding vegetation. The rehabilitation won an Engineering Excellence Award in the 1980s. The Kalkadoon people are the traditional custodians of this country. Number 2, Gwalia, Western Australia. On the 21st of December 1963, a structural accident damaged the headframe of the Sons of Gwalia mine, 828 kilometres northeast of Perth in the Great Victoria Desert. The mine closed immediately. Special trains were sent from Kalgoorlie. Within 3 weeks, the town's population fell from 1,200 to 40. The State Hotel, which had, in its time, served as a field hospital during the 1919 Spanish flu epidemic and hosted Western Australia's first beer strike in the same year, closed its doors on the 17th of January 1964. The mine was stripped of its equipment and the remaining residents left. Gwalia had been built around an orogenic gold reef discovered in 1896, and in its first year of operation the mine was managed by a young American geologist named Herbert Hoover, later the 31st President of the United States. Hoover cut costs by recruiting Italian immigrant labor, which created a distinctive cultural character in the town but also caused physical confrontations in the streets between Italian and Anglo-Celtic workers. At its peak in 1910, Gwalia had 1,114 residents, a passenger tramway to the neighbouring town of Leonora, a state-owned hotel, and a collection of miners' cottages made of timber, corrugated iron, and Hessian bags. In 1921, a major underground fire destroyed half the mine's surface works, forced a 3-year shutdown, and cut the population in half. The mine reopened, but costs kept rising and ore grades kept declining, and it limped on for 4 more decades before the headframe accident ended it in a single morning. The modern chapter is stranger than the history. Genesis Minerals acquired the site in July 2023, and the mine operating beneath the preserved historic town site is now the deepest trucking mine in the world, descending over 1,600 metres with plans to reach 2,300 metres by 2031. Above it, 22 miners' cottages have been preserved through a heritage scheme, and Hoover House, where the future president once lived, operates as a bed and breakfast overlooking the open-cut pit. The Wongatha people are the traditional custodians of this country. Number 1. Wittenoom, Western Australia. There is a town in the Pilbara that the Western Australian government removed from the official maps in 2007. They took down the road signs. They cut the electricity in 2006. They passed legislation in 2022 to formally close it. They began physically demolishing the remaining structures in May 2023. Wittenoom is not on the map because the government does not want you going there. And the reason they do not want you going there is not that the town is empty, it is that the town is still killing people. Wittenoom was a blue asbestos town. Chrysidolite, the deadliest form of asbestos, was mined from Wittenoom Gorge from the 1930s by Australian Blue Asbestos Limited, a subsidiary of the Colonial Sugar Refining Company. In 1947, to stabilise the workforce, the company built a proper planned town that grew into the largest settlement in the Pilbara through the 1950s. Approximately 7,000 workers and 13,000 residents lived there over the life of the mine. To suppress dust in the streets, the schoolyards, and the residential gardens, the company spread fine asbestos tailings across the town. Children played in it. The company knew what chrysidolite did to lungs. They kept operating anyway. CSR closed the mine on the 31st of December 1966, not because of the deaths, but because the price of blue asbestos had fallen too far to justify the transport costs. By 2024, more than 2,000 former workers and residents had died of asbestos-related diseases, predominantly malignant mesothelioma. The median exposure period for that cohort was approximately 18 months. 18 months of living in Wittenoom was enough. Over 3 million tonnes of toxic tailings remain exposed across 46,840 hectares, the largest contaminated site in the southern hemisphere, roughly equivalent to 1/5 the size of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. That land is Banjima country. The Banjima people cannot access their sacred sites. They cannot perform their cultural responsibilities. They cannot visit their country. Their community has the highest per capita rate of mesothelioma in the world. In February 2026, the Banjima Native Tidal Aboriginal Corporation filed a $1.5 billion lawsuit in the Federal Court of Australia against the Western Australian state government. The statement of claim points to a specific contrast. The Western Australian government has extracted more than $70 billion in mining royalties from the Pilbara region since 2016. It has not spent a single dollar on cleaning up the tailings at Wittenoom. The lawsuit seeks court orders to seal the 3 abandoned mines, remove the tailings dumps, clear the contaminated airport and racecourse, and remediate the polluted gorges. It seeks damages for the long-term dispossession of a people from their own country. The town has been demolished. The road signs are gone. The maps do not show it. The tailings are still there. The case is still in court. And the Banjima people are still waiting to go home. Every town on this list was built on the same promise: dig it out, build a life, and the ground will keep giving. The ground always runs out. What does not run out are the tailings, the contamination, the shafts, and the question of who gets left with them when the company is gone. A ghost town is not just a place where people used to live. It is the physical record of what was taken and what was left behind. If you want more Australian history that the road signs do not cover, subscribe. We go deep every week.